going to try out a little intro and see how it goes.
All right, I love it. Okay.
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Welcome back to Crosstabs. We're taking you inside Oregon politics. I'm here, Reagan Knopp, your co-host, with my co-host, Bryan Iverson. Bryan, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Reagan. I'm ready. I am, except for I might get a cramp, being that the avid indoor cycler that I am. I went pretty hard today, my fight against the bulge as I get older. That's what I'm training for. So if I do cramp out, I'll scream and go to the floor, but I think I'll be all right.
Bryan, I want to ask you a question about the Pelotons because I'm curious about them. I know they have like a cool screen on there. Can you like select a certain route, like somewhere else in the world that you want to do? You want to bike a route, you want to run the Tour de France, you want to be in Spain and race the bulls. Can you do something like that and have it kind of work with you to kind of give you what that experience might be like?
Yeah, they have some of those, but I've tried a couple of them and they seem a little because they all kind of go at the same speed, right? So if you think about it, if somebody's videoing it and showing you riding, they're riding at the same speed. And I think what makes the Peloton unique is that, oh, we're hill climbing and they kind of do some like they do Palomar Mountain. I just did that ride, which is 3 45-minute rides, and it's like I think it's called Palomar Mountain in San Diego, and you basically do like you're going up that mountain. It's a 2.5 hour ride, and you do it in 3 different parts. And man, I tell you, I am dead after I'm done with 45 minutes of that. But at the end of a long week, I'm looking forward to the weekend. Looking forward to a few days off, and excited to not have to bust my butt on my Peloton. What about you? What have you been doing?
Been cutting the heads off of chickens, Bryan. My brother-in-law and his family raised like 80 something meat chickens, and I was helping them. Obviously you gotta kill them. You gotta drain the blood. You gotta put them in a hot water bath to kind of get the feathers ready to be plucked, and then you drop them into this motorized plucking machine that has all these little, not foam, but like plastic fingers sticking out of it, and it just like wipes the feathers off of them, and then you gotta gut them and all that stuff. So I started easy, Bryan. I started on the little feather machine, worked up to, hey, we need someone to cut some more heads off of it. I said, I'll give it a shot. And I'm honestly not too bad. X-Acto knife, 1, 2, 3, usually cuts as it takes to get through. I had a 2 earlier where it's just 2 cuts straight through. So it's just not something that I think it made me think about the urban rural divide and like the differences on the kind of, I mean, it's not like I'm going to do this every day. I certainly could if I was running a big old chicken farm, but I don't really plan to. That's not something that gets me excited. But just to experience it, 1 or 2 times in your life and kind of understand more about our food systems. And, this is something that in a rural community, if you want to raise your own chickens and your own meat and not be reliant on a grocery store that's an hour and a half away, maybe that's something that people are more likely to do. And I think kind of understanding it, and it's good for all of us.
Oh man, I couldn't agree more, Reagan. And it's great to see that, Lynn County's what the chicken capital of the world, or at least of Oregon, that's for sure. So it's good to see that, we don't grow, raise. I guess it's raise when you ranch, it's raise, grow if you farm. We don't deal with chicken. My wife calls it fowl, and she got that from my father-in-law, and he's like, "We don't eat fowl around here. We're cattle ranchers." So, as much as we like eggs, we don't eat a lot of chicken. But the eggs, I definitely like farm-raised eggs. Those are the best.
Yeah, and that's what I have. I have laying hens at my house. I've got 7 of those, and so that gives us 5 to 6 eggs a day, which is way more than enough. We're usually giving them out to folks at church, and then I do have 2 head of cattle, Bryan, that we're going to butcher here in the next month or 2, hopefully, which will be really exciting. Love a good steak.
Now you're talking my level. I've butchered a couple of myself. where I've shot them out on the ranch. We'd hang them up and I'd slice and dice them and gut them, and right there out in the field. And then we dig a hole, we throw the guts in so the coyotes don't come into the field and everything, and off they go, to get processed. And that's definitely a little bit more than 1-2 X-Acto knives around the neck. You're right, though. That is an urban rural divide. I grew up in the Portland area, and I think that your kids, my kids have been able to experience living in the country, and it's really something that they'll go with him. And I don't know where they'll end up living, or, in a big city or not, but man, just having that experience and just knowing that they're so much ahead of some of their other friends that are in the city and stuff.
Totally agree. Something else I love just as much, well, not quite just as much, but something that I love a lot, like steaks, is feedback from our listeners. Knowing that people are listening brings me a lot of joy. And we have former state representative Marty Wilde, who put a comment on one of our episodes, and I just kind of want to read it because I think he makes some good points here. So this is back from episode 7, and he's talking about the judicial jailbreak. He says, "You're right. It's an extreme option," talking about letting everybody out of prison. "On the other hand, the state hasn't been in a hurry to fix the problem and is still trying to do so on the cheap. Having practiced criminal defense in 3 different jurisdictions at various times in my career, Oregon is by far the one doing the worst. The Sixth Amendment Center wasn't wrong to call it unconstitutionally deficient. A sensible solution would be additional reinvestment in appointed counsel, investment in a career development track for a defense counsel, and the state taking over paying for deputy DAs as well, a longstanding and fair criticism by the counties. It will take money, but frankly, not all that much of it in the big picture of the state budget. If you want an easy revenue source, bump up marijuana taxes. They're still very low." What do you think about that, Brian? I think he makes some good points.
He sure does. I think that, I don't know if I'm just so against raising taxes, because I feel like it, even though it's marijuana taxes and I don't do anything with marijuana and I don't really care, but I just feel like it leads to just other taxes getting raised. And I don't know. I don't know if that's really the answer, but Marty's a smart guy. I think he knows what he's talking about when it comes to this stuff. So I just think it's great that he reached out and told us what he thinks. We like hearing from people. We've gotten a few comments. I think I got another one that lady was trying to get us to help them find Bend school board members and stuff. So as much as I would love to help, I don't know if Bend might be a lost cause at this point, Reagan. I fought that battle many times in Bend. And so keep the comments coming. We love to see them. Crosstabs.studio is the place to go and comment on our stuff. Tell us what we should be talking about. I like to hear that as well. Like, what stuff do you guys want to hear about? What policy stuff? I think between you and me, well, you're way smarter on the policy than me, but I think we can find people that want to come in and talk about certain policy stuff as we kind of we're going to dive into that, because that's what we are, right? We're crosstabs. We're going to dive in behind just the headlines and really kind of dive in. So I wanted to touch on Trump while we're doing follow-ups. I think, we had in the notes here, which I thought was really interesting, and you put in there, which I thought was really cool, is he's only 7 points down in New York City. Like the place where they convicted him, 7 points down, Reagan. He's even in Virginia, -1 in Maine. These states are all off the table, by the way. They were considered off the table, not even in contention, but now they're in contention. And I think it does beg the question, I wonder where he's at in Oregon.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of my point in putting this out here, Brian, is I'm hoping, and I'm talking to some people and see if I can get somebody to do just a quick statewide poll just to try Trump versus Biden and Trump versus Biden versus RFK. Because RFK, I think if you look on his website, I need to go double check it. He has this tracker of where he thinks he's going to be on the ballot based on their signature gathering. And in Oregon, he would need to gather a decent number of signatures, just like Betsy Johnson did, to get on the governor ballot as essentially a non-affiliated candidate, not with a party. That's a little harder access, but it can still be done. There's still a way to do it through signatures. So if he's on the ballot, that could affect how things go. I mean, Oregon is a state, RFK Jr. is known for being strong on anti-vaccines. Oregon's a pretty anti-vax state, especially Ashland and Bend, and those are two places where Biden really wouldn't be able to afford to lose votes if Oregon got competitive. And don't forget that Oregon has been competitive as recently as 2000 and 2004. Both times Bush really competed for the state. And so I think that I was also seeing a tweet earlier from Trey Rosser kind of noting that Oregon's statewide registration gap is narrowing, and the registration in the major congressional districts 5, 6, and 4 all trending slightly more Republican than they have 2 years ago. And those are all things that I think should make Democrats pay attention. And I think there's a lot of these states where Trump's starting to compete where it's not a given anymore. They're going to have to battle it out. And if Oregon becomes one of those states, that could ripple down the ballot.
I think, well, you're pretty spot on with a lot of those things. I think just a layer onto it, it's not this love of Trump that's driving this, because I was looking at those statewide numbers that you said Trey was referencing, and I think we even had a little back and forth with John Harvick about some of the numbers, right, of people leaving parties and stuff, but they're leaving the Democrat Party way faster than they're leaving the Republican Party, way faster than they're leaving, the who gives a shit independent party in Oregon. And I think that, and the fastest growing party, to your point, or actually there was one that was growing, which is like the No Labels Party, right? They're actually gaining people at a huge clip right now. And that's your RFK thing that you talked about, which is interesting. I just think that the Democrat policies that they're embracing are so extreme that people are just like, dude, I mean, they'll go, I talk to people, they're like, Bryan, I can't get on board with your Trump guy, but dang, Biden is horrible. Or they'll be like, dang, what are these guys thinking? This is so nuts, and I'm just like, welcome. We're the big tent party for a reason. And so I think that's what we're seeing is a little bit of like that double effect of, Trump coming up with, I think, some pretty good ideas. And you and I have always talked about where Trump has always been smart is kind of skating like Wayne Gretzky used to always say, right? I mean, you skate to where the puck's gonna be, not where the puck is going. So I think Trump has always kind of had a little better pulse on voters than I think we've ever really given him credit for. And he kind of leans into that. And I think he's been doing, and he's probably got a bunch of smart people around him, right, telling him what to do. I'm sure there got to be, but he also just has that intuitive nature that I find very interesting that a lot of people don't have politically.
Well, the real challenge with that, Bryan, is breaking outside of the box and thinking creatively. And I think because he doesn't have a long background in politics, there are these things that a lot of us, you say, oh, you can't touch that. Oh, we can't do this. Oh, this will never happen. We get stuck. And really, it's the people who come in and say, why can't we flip this table over? Why can't we move this over here? And Trump's going to do that. He doesn't care, right? There are a lot of things where he just doesn't care about the 20, 30, 40-year history of it. He's like, well, I'm supporting change in this. I'm going to lead on this. And a lot of people go, well, you can't do that. And he'll just say, well, why can't I? And it doesn't necessarily always mean that it happens, but it means voters are seeing in him a difference between him and Biden where he's thinking creatively. And I think that's where, you and me as politicos with all of this baggage, we need to be able to think outside the box. Just so what that this thing failed 10 years ago? Maybe now's the time to bring it back and it's going to pass this time, I think a lot of issues, we think the pendulum swings a lot slower than it actually does.
Yeah. Well, we're in that, in that discussion even now. Like I see that reading some of the articles talking about, traffic planning and stuff. And I don't want to this is just an example of what you're saying. So there's an issue with infrastructure funding, and we're going to dive into this deeper, but there's an issue with it. And I don't, it seems like all they're talking about is the same old solutions that haven't worked. And we got to get creative. We got to figure out a way to move people from point A to point B in a collective strategy that makes sense. And it's not like, oh, just go raise more taxes. Like that's not the answer. So, and I think, like, to your point, Trump has been able to do that stuff, with his innovative ideas. And just like we put in the notes here, like when he was down in Las Vegas and he just said, hey, how about this? Like, why are we taxing tips, from these people on the bottom ring of the economic ladder that are bartending and serving tables, and they're the ones going to school, working the bars at night, working the restaurants during the day or whatever, the coffee shops trying to get by, and yet we're going to tax their tips. And, half of them probably cheat on their tips anyways. So it's almost built into the number of hours you work and stuff. So, like, he's innovative, like nobody really thought about that, but I bet it's galvanizing that base of voters.
Well, and you think about tips, a lot of them happen in cash and all that stuff, so it's already hard to trace. And the political government version of let's figure out how we can crack down and figure out exactly how many tips are going out so that way we can get the right amount of tax revenue from that. It's like, or how about this? Let's let people live their lives. And I think that's sort of more the direction that he's trying to go is, hey, you worked hard for those tips. Why don't you just keep all of them? Right. And all that kind of thinking is not the political traditional thinking that a lot of people have. And I think that's what allows them to, remain a player on the stage. And you're totally right too. It's not like Oregon's turned around and become a red MAGA state, but Biden has been bad for Oregon in terms of the economy, in terms of gas prices. We're going to talk about, we have our first ever interviews here on this episode as well about the border, and Biden is addressing it because it's a political problem for him and his party, and Trump is capitalizing on it because he's been consistent on it, and he fixed the border issue while he was president, and then it got bad as soon as Biden stepped back in.
Yep. No, I hear you. I think, and speaking of that interview, make sure you stay tuned because we got the one and only for our first interview, Senator Tim Knopp, of course. So, and we're going to talk border mostly, and I kind of pushed him in the beginning on what's he doing, and that was kind of fun. But it was great to have him on. So we'll play that interview at the end of this podcast.
And Brian, many people are asking how Senator Tim Knopp and hopefully Representative Vicky Breeze Iverson are the first guests on our podcast. And I just want to put to rest the rumors. Yes, nepotism was a factor here. Brian, finally, after so many years of being on the receiving end of nepotism, we were finally able to give a benefit to your wife and my dad. And the nepotism is on its way back. So yes, I do want to address those concerns. We know we had a lot of people very interested in being our first guests, and the nepotism did win out here.
Well, yes, Reagan. That's the short answer to that. And if you don't like it, well, too bad. Get your own podcast. So
they're very easy to schedule, Brian, because we're close to them. That's the main benefit. Hey, can you be on the podcast today at 3:30? Sure.
Well, my wife is, I got to tell you, I mean, getting some time on her schedule sometimes can be pretty difficult, even if you're me, especially when it comes to doing media. She doesn't tend to want to do a ton of media. So she tends not to do too much, but she does like to talk policy. That's always been kind of her thing. I think she was thrown into campaigns, because she really needed to step up in a time when they needed to step up. And when she does something, man, she goes all the way. So even I can't stop her.
Absolutely. Brian, we have this ongoing theme here where we're talking about the Hamas Food Bank, being the Oregon Food Bank, the Portland Teachers Union, Hamas Union, and these guys just can't stop. And so we're doing a third straight week of this, Brian, because of this Willamette Week article that I saw here. Some city council candidates bristle at the line of questioning in the endorsement interviews by the teachers union. So the Portland Teachers Union is interviewing candidates for Portland City Council, and not on the written questionnaire where they do kind of more of the normal city government type questions. They're asking them if they think the city of Portland should do more about the ongoing genocide against Palestinians. And I just want to make this clear. I already tweeted this out. There is no genocide happening, and Palestine doesn't exist. So this really is a question about insane things happening in liberals' heads. And I just kind of wanted to get your quick take on this one, Bryan.
Oh, this is the best, Reagan. I mean, can these guys get dumber? I mean, really, even if you're a Democrat, you got to be sitting there scratching your head going, will you shut up at some point? Will you guys just shut up? You're killing us here, because you look at this stuff and you just go, I can't believe, and thank God for Willamette Week for holding people in Portland accountable. They seem to be some of the only ones doing it. And I love that. I want to be on the receiving end of the leaks that Nigel and Sophie have gotten over the years that they've passed on. Like, I'll take the stuff they passed on, Reagan, not even the stuff they've written on. It's just got to be amazing amount of the things that come in. And this one is great. I mean, I was looking at the submitted questions that some of these people want them to answer, besides the whole Hamas thing. Like you got burned. Was it last week? It wasn't even a week ago on this whole idea. Then why does it matter if the Portland Teachers Union is involved in Hamas discussions at all? Like, it's just dumb. And then yet you're going to put this on Portland City Council candidates who have nothing to do with what's going to happen over in that neck of the woods. It blows me away. But it is kind of funny because we do get to talk about it. So from that standpoint, I'm pretty happy that they did it, because it gave us another 5-10 minutes to talk about how horrible the Portland public school system is. And I wish these counselors would basically just give them the finger and not even go get their endorsement from them and just be like, I'm not. And some didn't, right? They had the Zimmerman, the one guy Zimmerman that works for Julie Brim Edwards. And I don't know if Zimmerman is Jewish or not. I don't know. I think that's a Jewish name as far as I know, but I'd be curious to know if he is. But he wasn't even given the questionnaire. Like, they didn't even but he works for Julie Brim, and she was somewhat critical when they were doing the walkout stuff. So they just basically threw him to the wolves, which I just find amazing. And so the Democrat on Democrat crime is pretty intense right now in the streets of Portland, let alone the real crime.
A great point, Bryan. And I think sort of when you get, this is the problem with the one party control, is you get so far deep into the Democratic control, they just think they can do whatever they want with no consequences. And I kind of wanted to get your take. So, Bryan, I need you to take off your Republican strategist hat, and I need you to, look behind your desk or wherever your Democratic strategist hat fell and put that on for a second, because I want to talk about this. Oregon Planned Parenthood CEOs were attempting to dissolve their own political arm. And then after massive pushback from a lot of, key Democrats, former lawmakers, current lawmakers, they decided not to do it right away, but they might still do it after this upcoming election. And I just wanted to talk with you about this. I was surprised to see normally these kind of inter-party feuds do not spill onto the pages of, public news, but here this one did. And OPB's, so their original report basically said there's 2 Planned Parenthoods in Oregon, and one of them is the Southwest Columbia one, and it kind of covers like the Portland and Willamette Valley area, Southwest Washington. And then there's one in Southern Oregon, and that kind of takes in a good chunk of the rest. And both of them send money to Planned Parenthood Advocates of Oregon, which is their like PAC political arm that does all the candidate endorsing and the lobbying and stuff like that. And these 2 CEOs were like, well, they send more than $700,000 to the lobbying arm annually, according to this article. And the Columbia Willamette, Portland area Planned Parenthood, they have $36 million in annual revenue with total expenses of $31 million. That's $5 million in profit, if my math is right. They are looking at their budgets and they're wanting to eliminate their political arm. Do you have any insight onto why they might take this kind of a direction?
Well, I don't, especially making it public is kind of interesting. I would imagine there had to been, nothing has ever leaked. Let's just be let's be real there, right? Things are leaked because they want an outcome. And I think what we might find here is you have maybe some believers within that Planned Parenthood group that, kind of feels that they want to take it in a different direction. They want to do, they believe in abortion rights and all the things, and they just maybe want to focus on it's constitutionally legal in Oregon, all the things, and they're just saying, hey, listen, we got other things we want to do with the money. And I'm guessing the other people are like, no, we got to use abortion and we're going to ride that horse until she bucks, right? And throws me down a ditch. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening. And so these guys basically say, well, let's write a memo and leak it. So I think that's probably what kind of happened on this end of it. Knowing that Jennifer Williamson is around it, it's just interesting to me. So I think at the end of the day, there was a goal that you and I don't have a Democrat strategy yet. So it's because I don't know how they use abortion. All I know is they use it every single chance they get. Every single time they're stuck on, well, Portland teachers, yeah, well, Hamas is great, Jews suck. And we call them out on it. They go, what about abortion? So it's like, it's literally the go-to for any time you're stuck in a corner. And I would tell anybody like, oh, you're on a stage and something's wrong, just go to abortion. Like it's the go-to for them on everything. And it's because it's their one issue that they get, probably a 60+%, people want abortion rights. So I don't know. I think this is just silliness, but I love it and I want more of it. So let's get it out there more.
Well, you were talking, I mean, this is definitely that dim on dim crime that you were talking about. I have a theory, Brian, and you can tell me what you think about this. I think these two CEOs, as I said, they send about $700,000, and I don't know. I think that's annually. So, in a 2-year election cycle, that's $1.5 million basically that you're spending on politics. And they look at the state. Yeah, right. As Republicans, we're $1.5 million. Sure, who cares, right? It's not like that's a large amount of money for our campaigns. Oh wait, it is. But for them,
Reagan, that's 2 House races. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah, 100%. And I think these guys, they look at their budget, they look at Oregon being so rock solid on abortion, and they look at Republicans not winning statewide races, and they just go, well, look, as long as Democrats stay in control, abortion is going to stay legal. And if we lose control, the Republicans, maybe they have enough votes to do it, maybe they don't. Whatever. We're just going to say that the Democrats will protect us and we don't have to spend any money on this. And frankly, Brian, I think their strategy is right. They're correct. Nothing happens if you dissolve Planned Parenthood in Oregon, because we would have to win really solid majorities, I think, in order to overturn that. And we have to have the governor's office. And we might even still need the courts. I mean, and that takes a long time. And you see this, and this is something that we're going to talk about, as you've seen, the mission creep, where Portland teachers should be focused on education. They're like, as you know, we need to tell everybody the Jews suck. When this Planned Parenthood story broke, ACLU was out there saying how horrible it was. They tried to close it. Basic Rights Oregon, Next Up Oregon, Emerge Oregon, Oregon Nurse Association. All of these groups are abortion groups now. They're not just in their own lane. So who cares if one of them falls, if all the rest of them are still there on abortion? Kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there with the mission creep for sure. And I think that these other groups want to get into the abortion business because the political business, the fiscal business, you name it, abortion's big money, right? From a political standpoint, there's a lot of capital in it. So Basic Rights Oregon doesn't want Planned Parenthood to have all the say on what happens with abortion on their side of the ticket. And the reality is, politically, just straight politically, we're at 25. I'll just take the House, for instance, 25 members in the House, and there's 35 Democrats. For us to get to 30, that's 5 seats we have to win. That's some quick math for you, Reagan. On those 5 seats, they will come from the suburbs of Portland. For the most part, right? There might be one or two or the suburbs of Bend or the suburbs of Eugene or you name it, right? But they're coming from the suburbs. In the suburbs, abortion runs at a higher click rate than it does in rural Oregon, meaning more people want to have abortion rights. So you're going to get Republicans that are probably a little softer on abortion than, say, a Republican from Eastern Oregon or Southern Oregon. So even if we got to 30-30 on some miracle year, great candidates, all the things, there's no way in hell that they're going to lead day one of the long session going, all right, it's time to get rid of that abortion thing. Let's go. It's just not going to happen. So I think you're truly on to something. Is like they're just saying, listen, problem solved. And the Democrats never claimed victory on a problem. Have you realized that? Like the climate change, the border, homelessness, abortion, like at some point, take a victory lap. You won on abortion. Oh, no, it's not good enough. We got to go now to, 12-year-olds got to have free abortions, and we got to have campus abortions, all of it. Like they just won't take a win. And they also take on issues that I don't think are winnable. But abortion was, and I think you were onto something, it was an achievable outcome. They achieved the outcome, and now they don't know what to do.
Totally well said, Brian. I think the other thing about it, too, that is interesting to me, and I think this is what it gets to, right? What I'm reading that article is it's all about the money. And I think that's what they think, too. They're worried that the government spigot for abortion might get turned down a little bit. Because the worst that's going to happen, this is next cycle, you get a split House or a split Senate or Republican control of one or both chambers. You still got Tina Kotek in the governor's office. But what happens if Republican budget writers turn down the spigot? You can veto line items. You can't add new ones. You can't be like, but I'm going to write in Planned Parenthood funding. So I think they're worried about losing government funding. And that's the interesting thing about this to me is what happens to Planned Parenthood's business if they lose too much government funding? Does it collapse? Do they have to close? Do they have to provide less abortions? Do they have to, they claim abortion isn't the primary part of their business, even though it clearly is, that they do all this other, healthcare stuff. What if they don't get reimbursed for that? I think that is the place where they're worried the most, or at least some of these lawmakers are like, well, what if I can't get the Planned Parenthood line item in there? Then what's going to happen, right? So all that to say, I think that it's a fascinating thing to kind of see a little window into what's happening behind closed doors with the Democrats and their coalition, and going to be watching this story to see what happens either later this year or in 2025.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of things going on with the Democratic Party right now in Oregon, especially with this push-pull, I think, in the party. And they're letting it play out in the newspapers, which normally we reserve that for Republicans to do. So thank you, Democrats, for leading the headlines for us. Can we keep it going until about November 7th or so? That'd be wonderful. On that note, Reagan, I think this is a good time for us to go to our interview with Senator Tim Knopp. Welcome, everybody, to Crosstabs interview style in the studio. We're here today. Our very first guest, which I'm super excited about, my former boss, my co-host's dad, and one of the best senators I've ever had the pleasure of working with, Senator Tim Knopp. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be with you.
Well, thanks for being here. Reagan's here as well. My co-host, Reagan, thanks for being on. I think this is going to be fun. We're going to try to keep the conversation focused on Arizona and the border trip that we did earlier this spring. But Senator, thanks for coming. I truly was a pleasure doing this trip with you, and it was a real pleasure working with you on campaigns in the last couple of years together. And I'm going to fire off just a real quick one. Like, what's next for Senator Knopp before we get into the Arizona thing? Like, what are we doing now? Like, what's the plan?
Well, right now I'm doing what I think is going to serve our state best, which is to try to elect more Republicans at the Oregon Senate and House level, and even in Congress. I think it would be incredibly damaging to the country if Democrats were able to take Congress back. And right now, the number is so close that if the D's just win a few seats, handful of seats, they could take Congress back, and that would cause a lot of problems for the country. And so I'm doing what I can to get more good Republicans elected. I think an 80% friend is better than 100% enemy, because the adversaries that the D's are, and the issues that they want to espouse do not line up well to, number one, protect this country, and number two, to economically make it so that families can actually survive. And we've seen this inflation, we've seen all these things that are overtaking our families, and all this stuff is solvable. It's literally bad policy choices by Democrats that are causing these problems. And we just need to educate the public that there is a significant difference. And so when we elect a Dick Anderson again to Senate District 5, or we elect a Michael Summers to Senate District 27, that makes a huge difference. And so that's what I'm focused on right now to the end of the year.
Well, thanks, Senator. Yeah, speaking of congressional policy and presidential policy, I mean, a lot of people, I don't know, there's a lot of people that maybe the negative pushback when you and myself and Reagan got to go. And then I think we had Reagan 15, 16 other, Republican representatives that went down, and candidates that went down to the border. That border policy is, it's the number one issue in Republicans and non-affiliated voters. It's right there with inflation. They're like hand in hand, is just horrible policy. But Democrats it seems like they just want to keep it open. And I don't know really the answer there, but it sure feels like whatever we're doing isn't the right answer, but the right policy. And I don't know if Reagan, maybe real quick, like set us up, like why did we go, what did we do, and then we can kind of get into our thoughts about it.
Brian, I think that's a good way to set a baseline here for the audience. And I think I just thought it would be easy enough to sort of pull up. There was a little bit of news coverage because we let people know in advance that we were going to do this trip. And so they published that. And I'm going to read a quote from Senator Knopp. "We know that there are drugs coming over the border, and those end up in probably all states, but certainly in Western states. We've obviously seen some crime impact." So he's talking about the fact, and I just saw another tweet today, Colorado is sending some of their illegals to Utah, and the governor of Utah was like, this is not cool, and they didn't communicate with us about it. And he said, what we heard down there, every state is a border state. So I think that's the kind of baseline that this is impacting everybody. You mentioned the polling. It's the number one issue in Gallup polling when you talk about non-economic issues. And so it seems pretty salient to people. And so I think we just needed to go down and gather more data. And then we had this response from the Democrats, because they always get a quote from the Democrats. The Senate Democratic Leadership Fund, Oliver Mugley: "Oregonians expect their elected officials to be focused on people in our state, not playing MAGA politics 1,000 miles away. This is a cheap election year stunt that does nothing except show people how deeply out of touch Republican politicians are with Oregon priorities." And I certainly thought that was interesting. They were focused on the issues here in Oregon we got back. Those weren't fixed, so I don't know what they are waiting for exactly, but that sort of sets one side calling it a stunt. We're talking about it as an information gathering trip. And Senator, I'd be interested in your feedback on what you feel like you learned going on the trip that wasn't so clear just from news coverage and reading data that you may get in the legislature.
Yeah, thanks, Reagan. So when you watch the news or you see news in social media, they talk about the border impact, but what most Americans and what most Oregonians don't see is the destruction of these communities along the border and the destruction in terms of lives. And the media fails to report so many assaults, rapes, murders, kidnappings, and every once in a while you'll hear about a big drug bust that they'll promote. But this happens on a daily basis, every night. People are coming over the border. We don't know who they are. We know that the people that have been caught, there have been terrorists in that group. There have been drug cartel members in that group of people. And the biggest segment of that group coming over the border are males that are 18 to 35. And they aren't all coming here just to help out with agriculture or jobs that, allegedly Americans won't do. And so what we really need to focus on is legal immigration. We still are a country that welcomes people legally. We want to know who you are. We want to know what you're about. We want to know that you're going to be loyal to the United States of America. We want you to become a U.S. citizen. And there's a process to do that. And that needs to be cleaned up. It needs to be streamlined by Congress. And we need to get away from this open border where somebody says they want to seek asylum. They turn themselves in, quote, get caught, and end up being released into the country, and they don't have a hearing for 7 to 10 years. And so they just disappear into the country and become part of the fabric, but yet are here illegally. And so we need to focus on allowing our law enforcement to work with federal law enforcement to make sure that if people are committing crimes that are here illegally, that they're either in prison or they're deported. And, nobody's worried about somebody who gets a speeding ticket, but we are concerned if you're selling drugs, molesting children, driving while intoxicated and injuring and killing people, and, committing, kidnapping, rape, and murder. I mean, we are not interested in that happening in our cities and counties across Oregon or across America. And so we need to come up with a strategy that helps law enforcement, the local level engage and improve safety for all Oregonians.
Wasn't that like Measure 110 when we were doing all that in the short session? And one of the proposals or the amendments that were kind of out there was this: basically, if you're a drug dealer and we catch you and you're an illegal alien, we're going to turn you over to ICE, right? Like we're going to make that part of, the law, basically, that you had to. And the Democrats didn't want that in there. And I don't know, I guess I struggle with the why. Why do Democrats not want to have a controlled border? Like it baffles me to the point, especially being down there and seeing like the rape tree and all the things that you see. Like, why not control that border? Why not let the people in that truly need asylum, that we want to welcome in? Obama talked about, the dreamers, these kids that that came in, and then, like, to your point, like all of a sudden that shifted where I think maybe all those people that wanted in kind of came in, and now we're down to the 18 to 34-year-olds. I don't know if you have any thoughts on either of you two, but I don't know why that. It just baffles me why they don't want to clamp down.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, part of it is Democrats are looking for people who are going to be reliant on them when election time comes around and will ultimately vote Democrat. And someone who is reliant on the government is more likely to vote Democrat. And I don't know if that's what most politicians are after, but it sure feels like it, to be honest with you. And it is disconcerting because one of the things we learned is that at just the border crossing that I think we went to, so that was the Yuma, Mexico, California border. So Arizona, California, Mexico, in the Yuma sector, 155 countries were represented annually of people who came over the border. So they're not just coming from Mexico, Central America. They are coming from all over the world. And one of the places most recently that's had a significant increase, a spike, as it were, is males 18 to 35 from China. And you have to ask yourself, why and how are Chinese citizens getting to the Mexico, California, Arizona border and crossing there? And why? And I can't think of a good reason. So you've got, I asked the question, why Democrats say they care about labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is a function of the illegal entry across our border. They say they care about sex trafficking. Again, also a function of people illegally coming across the border. We saw some just horrific and heard horrific stories about kids and women being sexually assaulted and raped just to get in to the country, almost somehow as you have to have this happen in order for you to come across. And I'm sure that they must care, but if they truly care, they want to shut that down. They want to protect these women and kids from these things that are happening to them. And then the same thing that's happening in these border communities. And the thing, I guess, that bothered me the most is Democrats say they care about people of color. And almost every single person whose rights are being violated, whose bodies are being violated, are having crimes committed against them, are people of color. Almost all of them. And so where's the outrage? And, to say that somehow going to the border is political, no. It's responding to what Oregonians say that they care about, and it's doing something about it through legislation in the coming sessions that is going to be necessary, because we need to join the border states and we need to support them, their sovereignty. And if the other thing we learned is that 50% of the fentanyl coming in to the United States is coming from China into Mexico and over the border in Arizona in several sectors. 50% of all the fentanyl. Yeah. And that's, and as we know, dangerous and deadly.
Is that the good fentanyl or the bad fentanyl?
Exactly. It is all dangerous and deadly. And so the idea that somehow that the border is not an issue, it is the issue, is the defining issue. If you can't control the borders of your country, you have no country. It's just the bottom line. That's the bottom line. You can't keep people safe. You don't know who's here, and all you're doing is setting up the next cartel in the U.S., the next terrorist attack in the U.S. if you don't control your border. And right now, it does not seem like there is much control of the border, because illegal crossings are up substantially over the last few years.
And that's kind of what we heard. Fixing Measure 110 was, took a monumental task, right? I mean, It was getting everybody on board. It was convincing everybody that this week didn't convince everybody. There were still some far left-wing groups that didn't want drugs. But I mean, even if we could Measure 110 or whatever, I mean, we could have penalties that could have been, 20 years in prison, and it doesn't matter if we don't stop the flow of drugs.
Yeah.
And so in Oregon, it doesn't make a difference if we don't stop the flow of drugs. I even, saw you on Dr. Phil, and we got to talk about the flow of drugs in the same conjunction of fixing it on the streets. Like it just can't, and the flow of drugs is coming from Mexico. So that's why it's a local issue to Oregon. I mean, just that one alone, the human trafficking, all the other things that are also responsible for that. And that to me was the huge takeaway of why it is an issue for us. To Reagan's point of Oliver Mugley or whatever his name is on the Democrat side, like, oh, they're going to stay here and care about issues Oregonians want them to fix. I kind of thought Measure 110 was a big issue they wanted us to fix. So
it is, and so we made a lot of progress by the fixes that we did to Measure 110, but we asked the question, what's next? What can we do to help improve beyond what we just did? And we dealt with recriminalizing hard drugs. Now we need to deal with the supply of those drugs and make it incredibly difficult for those drugs to get out on the street. We have to fight this fight because Oregonians are dying from early ages to the elderly. Oregonians are dying before our eyes. 1,600 people on an annual basis was, I think, the last stat that I saw. And almost the vast majority of those are fentanyl deaths. And again, 50% of the fentanyl coming through the Arizona border. And we talked to several Arizona legislators. They said, we need your help. We need you to talk about this. We need good policies. We need to have people talk to Congress about it. Now the president acted a little bit, but it kind of looks like he's just doing some election year stuff that he really doesn't mean. And, the Democrats need to get serious about this. And it is going to be an issue because Oregonians already believe it's an issue. The only people in Oregon that this isn't in the top one or two issues are the liberal Democrat base. Everybody else, not affiliated, independent, Republican, so on, it's either a number one or a number two issue or tied for number one, border security. And it needs to be addressed. And at the state level, we need to do what we can to address and support and help those who are fighting this fight for us on the border. And man, I mean, law enforcement was doing everything they could do, but it's clear they're overwhelmed, outgunned, and the cartels have way more resources than our border agents do.
Well, you look at this, and also in 2021, Democrats are passing pro-sanctuary legislation, and now we're just, 3 years removed from that, and Biden is doing an executive action to sort of supposedly tamp down. And I think you're right. I mean, obviously, it doesn't go very far. It looks more like a signaling thing to try to muddy the waters or neutralize the issue for Democrats so they don't have to face it. But even then, still, the far left-wing groups are suing the Biden administration for putting these even, minor limits on border crossings, right? And it's just so funny to me. I mean, the ACLU is the first one there, and it's like they're the American Civil Liberties Union. If you're not an American, you don't have a lot of these protections. And it's like, what happened with the ACLU and these other groups that they're now all engaged for some reason on this immigration fight?
Well, and at the border, again, if Democrats care about people of color are dying on the border, near the border. They're being raped at and near the border. Where's the outrage? Why don't you care? And I want to see everyone protected. And if people need jobs, I want to see legal immigration and jobs found for people. But what we can't have is this almost open border policy that pretty much lets anyone into the country. We have no idea. Not all of them surrender or get caught. There's a decent percentage that get into the country. We have no idea who they are, where they went, and what they're up to. And that is a serious problem because we know there are people who have ill intent toward America. And you have to look no further than the violence on our college campuses and the anti-Semitic stuff that's going on. People are willing to commit violence against Americans and against anybody they disagree with. And if we don't know who they are and they're coming across our southern border, and now we're having trouble with the northern border too. Nobody's talking about that. But I think that deserves some attention as well.
That's crazy. Well, I think the Portland Teachers Union wants to join everybody else in the Hamas caucus with those.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just upset they're not getting attention anymore, so they have to, throw a firebomb or something. I think you're so right with the southern border being just it's just a lightning rod for so much negative. And America has a history. And we're not talking about like political refugees coming in from Africa or coming in from these war-torn countries. We have a history of welcoming those war-torn areas into America, in large tranches, right? When we've seen wars in Afghanistan to other stuff where we say, hey, these people got nowhere to go. We got to let them into America. We've done that. So it's not like America, and especially Republicans, we're not some cold-hearted country that isn't going to welcome in people that are political refugees, but not through this process. It has to be legitimate. And what did Biden's law say? All you got to do is say you fear for your life and they'll let you in, and then it doesn't count against the number. I mean, that's not a policy.
No, it's not. And again, I want to be very clear. We are for legal immigration. Everybody's family, almost everybody's family, came from somewhere else. The earliest members of my ancestors that came in 1630, before the United States of America, long before, came to America. And then the last came in the late 1880s, and they were from the Ukraine, and they call them Russian Germans, and they had a couple of choices. They could either be conscripted into the army, choose to deny that and be shot, or they could try to immigrate to the United States of America. Our family chose to immigrate to the United States of America, and ended up making their way west, as did the early settlers in 1630 that came to America. So you have a long history in America of embracing people from other countries and weaving a fabric that makes us stronger. We just need to do that in a legal way.
I don't think anyone else could have said it any better. Thank you, Senator Knopp. I know we're running up against your time. You've been very generous with us. Really appreciate having you on, and I'm sure we plan to have you back. You're welcome back anytime, of course.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
We'd like you to be our policy correspondent now that you have a little bit more free time. So when we need some sage advice on some policy stuff, we know which 30-year representative in Salem that really knows what's happened in history. So I look forward to it. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this episode of Crosstabs. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Don't forget to rate our podcast, especially if you use Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That helps us rise in the charts, get new listeners. You can follow me on Twitter at Reagan Knopp. You can follow at Brian G. Iverson, Brian Iverson on Twitter. You can follow at Crosstabs FM. Thanks so much for listening.